promoting a greater understanding of and commitment to the issue of Palestine amongst fellow political activists and stakeholders. Having long been active on political issues, in 2008, she joined Aswat, the Palestinian Feminist Center for Gender and Sexual Freedom. She passionately believes in the intersectionality of the struggle of Palestinian queer women and fighting a triple oppression as Palestinians, as women, and as LGBTQI people. Palestinian queer women are at the heart of the feminist, queer, and anti-colonial national liberation causes. Through her work and activism, Ghadir endeavors to make this intersection visible and to unite the feminist, queer, and Palestine liberation movement in a monumental struggle for justice and freedom. And today we are eager to listen to you. So please, when you want, I will put right now the PowerPoint, please, and let me know when you want me to change the screen. Okay.
Thank you so much, Èlia. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is not the first time I speak to audiences in the Spanish state generally, or in Barcelona particularly. We have had many collaborations over the last few years, and I'm very happy that we're not letting this pandemic virus prevent us from continuing our active solidarity with all Palestinians. Today we will, under the heading of queer activism, intersectional feminism, and national struggles in Palestine, I will try to share some of my insights of how our grassroots organizing and our feminist queer movement has been effective locally and globally, and what strategies did we use. It's always challenging to try and recall how our movements were born and how our own activism is not only inspired, but also empowered by those who came before us, by those who joined in with us, and by those who are marching ahead of us. And in trying to historize the queer movement in Palestine, it is imperative, in my opinion, to contextualize the intersection of queer politics and feminism, as the feminist movement has always been strategically and organically connected to national and social struggles, meaning that to a great extent, women's rights in Palestine, within Palestinian society are a mainstream issue. So despite constant efforts to marginalize women's voices and minimize our immense contribution in the struggle for justice and freedom, our institutional memory, our heritage, are those of a feminist movement that has always been actively involved in political, social, and national organizing, ultimately connecting struggles within a society that has been resisting occupation, settler colonialism, apartheid, Zionism, and sexism for almost 100 years. In establishing Aswat, the Palestinian Feminist Center for Sexual and Gender Freedoms, queer women from all over historic Palestine enriched and broadened this intersection to include gender and sexual freedoms. In doing so, Aswat has placed a special emphasis on the intersectionality of our struggles as Palestinians, as women, and as queer, uniting feminism, queerism, and resistance to all forms of oppressions into a monumental struggle has not only made us effective, it has also made us effective and relevant locally and globally. So I think in the past 2 decades or so, grassroots like Aswat, along with partner groups and activists, have worked independently to center and make visible the rights and freedoms of Palestinian queers. And I think Aswat, as a feminist group, we have created and sustained programs over the years to provide support and empowerment to our fragmented Palestinian community. We have developed training courses and programs, conducted research, and increased public awareness, engagement, and responsibility, produce knowledge, arts, and narratives by and for Palestinian queers, and work to establish a movement that does not quietly adhere to social and political constraints and taboos. And though we still have a long way to go and grow and learn and improve, we have come a long way. just to shed some light on what is actually happening within Palestinian society and the Palestinian queer movement in the past year or so. It has been going through a lot of things, and a lot of events have stimulated the birth of a new radical organizing, like the feminist movement Talat, which is a feminist movement that took the streets in massive marches, fiercely stepping out, as the name suggests. Talat means stepping out, against gender-based violence in all its manifestations: femicide, domestic violence, sexism, and violence against queers and queer bodies. Now, other events have directly affected the discourse on queer issues, like the Palestinian-owned Tahina company, which is a big company based in Nazareth, a Palestinian locality that decided to donate money to a line operated by an Israeli Zionist LGBT organization based in Tel Aviv. This event has increased awareness on pinkwashing and how it's mobilized to further oppress Palestinian queers. We've also seen the vote of the largest Arab party in the Israeli parliament and its vote or lack of vote on the conversion therapy law, a law which says that you can offer many treatments to convert people from being queer to being non-queer. And of course, these interactions has created a lot of media, politicians, and we see that the issue of sexual and gender freedoms is moving from the margins to the center of discussion. And I think that it opened for the first time in the history of our movement and in the history of our work and activism, for the first time, Palestinian society was openly discussing sexual and gender freedoms in public debates, in mainstream medias, within Palestinian TV, and on obviously social media platforms. Now, this is obviously offering a fertile ground for awareness raising and opportunities for real change to move the issue of sexual and gender diversity from the margins to the center. And this was only possible through this intersectional approach. To talk about sexual rights in Palestine will not work on its own. You have to intersect it with the feminist and national struggle. Now, these discussions are extremely important for us as queer activists. And I think they are particularly important, not just to build a society which is based on justice and freedom, but also to counter the policies of pinkwashing that target all Palestinians and not just queer Palestinians. And I think here, Èlia, I would like you to please show some slides on pinkwashing that I feel are extremely necessary for our audience to be familiar with. Now, for those of you who are not very familiar with the term pinkwashing, there have been many people spoke about pinkwashing. I think the first one was Sarah Schulman in her very famous piece in the New York Times in 2011, who spoke about pinkwashing in relation to Israel, Palestine. Many people spoke about pinkwashing. One of the pieces talks about pinkwashing as Israel's international strategy and internal agenda, which was written in 2015 and published at the Kohol magazine, which I will be also quoting here. So the second slide explicitly explains what pinkwashing is. Èlia, can you do the next one, please? Yes. This is exactly what pinkwashing means. If you take a moment to look at this image where you have the rainbow flag and the Israeli flag, and here in this image, the American flag, but we've seen over the years that many embassies, which are based in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, are actually also being complicit with Israel's policies of pinkwashing. Pinkwashing is when Israel talks about its relatively open rights on, or let's say, relatively liberal stance on LGBTQIA+ issues, but it's given it too much visibility in order to cover for the gross violation of human rights and international law that Israel practices against Palestinians, queers and non-queers alike, on a daily basis. And in this image, we see some of the main violations that Israel practices against Palestinians. If we want to name them, we see home demolition, we see imprisonment of political prisoners. If you can, Èlia, move to the next slide. I think expelling and displacing more Palestinians, making us refugees, home demolition of civilians. We see bombardment of populated areas, especially in the within Gaza Strip. We see a war, an ongoing war on besieged Gaza, who have been besieged for more than a decade now. We see roadblocks to control the movement of Palestinians. All these are daily violations that Israel imposes against all Palestinians on a daily basis. But in the end, it tries to celebrate its relatively liberal stance on LGBT issues in order to brand and rebrand itself as gay-friendly within our. In fact, Israel is trying to pinkwash all its crimes against Palestinians. And I think that pinkwashing is one of the most dangerous whitewashing strategies that Israel is, or propagandas that Israel is using over the years, in addition to whitewashing, greenwashing, artwashing, purple washing, because pinkwashing not only attempts to portray a progressive, a liberal, modern image of Israel, but it also at the same time, it aims to portray a very negative, backwards, homophobic image of the Palestinian, of the Arab, of the Muslim. And this is just another colonial tool to continue its oppression against all Palestinians. And I think we have to pay very particular attention to pinkwashing because we can see it everywhere. Èlia, if you can help us with the next slide, please. So again, to summarize, pinkwashing is a deliberate strategy used by Israeli government agencies. It's used by some of the embassies and unfortunately by all the LGBT organizations and LGBT community to promote its stance on gay rights, but deflecting, in order to divert the international attention from the gross violation of human rights and international law. Next slide, please. I think we have to pay particular attention to pinkwashing because we can see it everywhere. Israel tries to maximize its pinkwashing efforts through a different platform it has. My advice for those who would like to enrich their knowledge and engagement to counter Israel pinkwashing is to visit Pinkwashing Israel, pinkwashingisrael.com, and see what is the strategy, what is the counter strategy to deal with pinkwashing. And what we want out here today is for us, Èlia, we can continue scrolling with the. Yes, I think that Israel tries to maximize its pinkwashing efforts through, the Tel Aviv Film Festival, which we will talk about in a minute, through its gay pride, and I think one of the most abysmal, shameful campaigns that Israel launched during its pinkwashing efforts or during Pride Month is the campaign it launched after its most deadliest attack on Gazans in 2014, which left us all hopeless, literally. And this is the campaign that Israel used and abused during its aggressive war on Gazans. Tel Aviv Pride, the Summer of Love. This is how they call 2014, when thousands of Palestinians were killed at the hands of Israeli soldiers. If we see the next slide, please. We will see how the massive efforts of our comrades and our brothers and sisters in Madrid, in Barcelona, and all over the Spanish state have been in very warm and radical solidarity with us. This is the alternative pride in Madrid. This is the national pride in Madrid, World Pride in 2017, where a block of maybe 5 to 7 activists walked with "You can't pinkwash this," showing how Palestine is shrinking and how Israel is pinkwashing its crime It got massive attention from world media, and I really salute the efforts of all activists who are working collaboratively with us in active solidarity, who are being brilliant and creative in their efforts and consistent and committed to bringing justice to all Palestinians. So this is a photo from the Board Pride in Madrid. And the next one, please, Èlia. So obviously, movies, productions, film festivals are also something that Israel is using in order to bring more visibility to Tel Aviv as a gay haven. Ever since Israel launched its Tel Aviv Film Festival, we have been following it very closely, and then we launched the boycott, a call to boycott the Tel Aviv Film Festival, which also happens every year around Pride Month. And we have seen a lot of cancellations from film producers, directors, who have been extremely moved by our call to not to be complicit with Israel's war crimes. The next slide, please. Yeah. This is one of the campaign. I think this is one of the most successful campaigns that happened in 2019, where Israel tried to maximize its pinkwashing by singing and dancing its crimes. Eurovision took place in Tel Aviv, but while Israel was expecting a mere share of 50,000 visitors like the one in Barcelona, it ended up with 5,000, which is a total failure. Only 5,000 people attended Eurovision, even though we couldn't cancel Eurovision in Israel. But I think the success was that #apartheid was the second most popular hashtag after Eurovision. And I think that was an opportunity for the world to see Israel's aggressive violation and oppression against Palestinians. So we try to use these platforms in order to bring more visibility to the intersectionality of our struggle. You can't pat Israel on the shoulder for being relatively gay-friendly, but oppressing 4.5 million Palestinians living in the occupied Palestinian territories and Gaza Strip, and apartheid state for 2 million Palestinians like myself living inside of Israel, the state of Israel having more than 60 laws against us in all fields of life. If I try to get an apartment, if I try to get a loan, if I try to get to school, if I try to get a job, in all fields of life, there are rules and laws, institutionalized racial laws against us as Palestinians, not to talk about land ownership and all these things. So I think that Eurovision campaign was extremely successful, and to build on that, yeah, please, the next slide, we can see the most recent event, which was organized last year online because of the pandemic, under the title Love Queer Cinema, Hate Apartheid. We had some of the main producers, activists and academics who were actively involved in this effort, and a lot of artists who actually withdrew their productions 10 years ago, and they continue to be invested in convincing other film producers and people who work within the industry not to participate in the Tel Aviv Film Festival and not to be complicit with Israel's war crimes. So this year we had more than 14 film producers withdrew their movies. Now, of course, Israel doesn't always respect, so it's a real working process that sometimes producers and directors, they withdraw their films, but Israel continues to screen them, being in violation with contracts and so on and so forth. So I think that if we see the next slide, please. So I think that one of the main things that we try to counter through the pinkwashing efforts is that Israel tries to portray Palestinians in one image. We are either victims or terrorists. So if we are the victim, then the Israeli white gay man will come and save the Palestinian. Or if we are portrayed as the terrorist, then they have to deal with that as well. And I think over the past 5 years or so, one of the main initiatives in Aswat was starting COOS, Aswat's Queer Film Festival, which tries to showcase also productions from the region, which are similar to our struggle, but also portray different and diverse narratives of Palestinian queers, trans, queer women, and trans people, and just to show the diversity of our lives and not to constantly pinkwashing. So we have this, if we can move to the next slide, obviously here the Israeli is trying to teach the Palestinian how to eat with chopsticks because, you know, to be civilized. So we started COOS in 2015, and we had 4 editions so far, with the 5th edition coming this year. And the aim of COOS is also to try and bring, you know, productions from the region and from Palestine as well, and also create spaces for us to interact and talk about sexual and gender, or some images from the last COOS, which we try to bring, you know, films also from the region, short movies, try to encourage young Palestinian and Arab filmmakers and artists to make productions and give them platform and spaces, and of course work collaboratively with the other artists in the region as well, and to try and you know, voice the different voices of Palestinian queers and not narrow the productions to the pinkwashing Israeli propaganda productions. The next slides will just show some of the productions we had within COOS, and the next one is so that there's nothing hot about cruising in an apartheid state. This was one of the campaigns that people want to come and you know, just see another country. There are so many countries around the world that queer people can visit. Don't choose to come to Tel Aviv and be complicit with Israel's war crimes against all Palestinians. So I think that this is why it was important for us to work locally and globally, because globally, queer groups, activists, and the global queer was very much interested in queer Palestinians. Queer Palestinians are interested to bring more visibility to the issue of Palestine, not just to confine the solidarity of international groups and international queers to Palestinians, to Palestinian queers. So it was extremely necessary for us to intersect our struggle with the feminist movement in order to you know, this was a natural connection. We all started within the feminist movement, and to give voice and visibility to queer. And it was also necessary for us to connect to global movements that were successful. So I think altogether challenges often present real opportunities for real change. And I think that the feminist queer movement in Palestine has gained legitimacy and visibility, and has become effective locally and nationally and globally due to our insistence and commitment to our intersectional discourse and narrative. But I think we have also become effective globally by joining efforts with the Palestinian Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, known as BDS. A lot of people ask why BDS? My answer is, why not? BDS, or being active in BDS, is ethical, it is principled, it's smart, it's practical, and it's extremely effective. With BDS, it's a Palestinian led, while BDS is Palestinian led, it's a vibrant global movement that made up of trade unions, academic institutions, associations, and grassroots organizations across the world. And since its launch in 2005, BDS has dramatically challenged international support for Israeli apartheid and settler colonialism. And I think we have so many examples to review of that. Most relevant to us is Eurovision and the Tel Aviv Film Festival. And I think that Palestinian queers we have been effective, very crucial to the success of this global movement, especially in bringing more attention to Palestine within the global queer community, and creating links of solidarity and soliciting the support of queer groups in the fight against Israel's constant attempts to pinkwash its crimes against Palestinians. And we saw how effective it was in Eurovision again. We saw how it was effective, within the cinema and bringing more attention to queer cinema. And I think that today BDS centers queer voices nationally and globally. It talks about queer resistance in Palestine, the contribution of queer resistance. It talks about pinkwashing. It brings great attention to an act of solidarity. There are more than 140 groups in connection with BDS, queer groups around the world, who are constantly, this list is constantly growing every year. People who are not being complicit with the Tel Aviv Film Festival, not Tel Aviv Pride, they boycott Tel Aviv, and the tourism, manufactured gay tourism in Tel Aviv. And I think that queer voices in Palestine and queer activists, we try to amplify the voices of the marginalized, the oppressed, the occupied, the displaced, the alienated, the persecuted, the besieged, whether in Gaza or their own homes, the imprisoned in Israeli prisons as political prisoners. We try to speak on behalf of those who have no voice. And I think in doing so, we hope to bring justice and freedom to all Palestinians. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you will continue this discussion with your questions and interactions.
Thank you very much, Ghadir. I think it was very interesting, and apart from that, it was very illustrating, because unfortunately, I think it was a lot, this pinkwashing from Israel. And if we look at the popular culture, right? I remember the movie, you put the scene of the two boys, that Israeli movie that I saw it. I don't know how, but really it reached the TVs, no? And the idea of intersectionality. If anyone had it difficult to understand, or to, I think in Aswat it came to light very, very clear, right? It's a very clear example of how intersectionality has to work. I think in feminist movements here, it's not the same problem. Trying to express what intersectionality is and what can do for us, and how necessary it is, because women, I think feminists are used to listen in every movement, no, this for later, your rights come for later, national fight comes first, right? And for example, in the Arab Springs, we saw it clearly in Egypt, right? The women's rights come later. Right, first the national issue, and then and this idea, and then you put the queer thing, which is a kind of really what I said about the pinkwashing. It's unfortunately working, because the idea of the queer people in Arab countries, and especially in Palestine, and but also at the same time, my observation was that by doing this pinkwashing, and what they are creating is a LGBTQ movement in Israel, which completely lacks of intersectionality. Because if we cannot hear those voices also fighting for other fights, just this idea of Tel Aviv is the paradise for queer people, it debilitates it. It makes very, it's a very soft movement, and which I think it's it goes against themselves, right? It's like. And of course, I think all of us remember Eurovision from 2 years ago, which was clearly, well, everybody sees Eurovision each year, and especially Israel tries to put people like Ghana International and this girl that it's been a victim of bullying at school, right? It's like an extreme effort from Israel to put people like, see here, if you are bullied or if you are transgender, you can succeed and you can win Eurovision. We will send you to like, you will represent us in the world, right? This I think it's now, maybe with the first case we saw, oh wow, Israel is very progressive, but when you see this, like this is usual, this happens every year, then you start to think, is this an agenda? Do you have an agenda behind all of this? So thank you very much to put in order all of our ideas. I'm going to see if there are questions. Okay, you can, students, I'm sure you have a lot of questions. And I also heard in another conference from yours, it was very interesting, and I would like to ask you about that, if you could explain a little bit, because I had no idea. I heard you saying that, for example, while the Ministry of Education of Israel invests on sexual orientation in Israeli schools, the amount of money they spend on Palestinian schools under this same ministry is like they don't invest in this, like Palestinians are not ready to educate the children on these issues, like, and I would like to know a little more because it surprised me very much.
Thank you so much. So there are two things. This is a very important question, and I think it also shows how pinkwashing is also an internal agenda, not just it's a external propaganda agenda. So there are two things. According to the recent reports by EU and other European agencies, the total investment of the Ministry of Education or the Israeli government in a Palestinian student based in Israel, we're talking about 2 million Palestinians living inside Israel. So we go to the same schools. There's the Ministry of Education that operates all school systems inside Israel. So, but it has separation system within the system. So there are schools for Arab Palestinians and there are schools for Israeli Jews. And it has both all students, they take the same exams from the Ministry of Education. They take the same final exams, but throughout those 12 years, and some people say even 15 years of school education, the government invests one-tenth in a Palestinian student to its relative Israeli student. So we can see that the investment from age 3 is already 10 times better with Israeli schools. Now, this is in terms of facility, in terms of education, extracurricular activities, everything. In terms of, there are massive differences. But in relationship to sexual and gender identity, something important happened in the history of the Israeli queer movement. In 2009, there was a young man, which was, we don't know yet what happened. So a masked man goes into a youth center in Tel Aviv. He kills 2 people and injures a dozen. And then there's a whole, there's a lot of chaos around this, and they have a very big rally in Tel Aviv Square. And then the government says that they will do everything they can to create more friendly LGBT atmosphere within schools. So this is a decision for all schools. But the decisions start to be effective in 2010. giving large amounts of money to schools in order to LGBT organizations in order to make curricular education modules, to develop contents to school teachers, social workers, psychologists, people that work within this system, and provide training, compulsory training for teachers and so on. So we have seen a lot of investment also to LGBT organizations, and also to within the schools, the school systems. If we compare, there was no monitoring for this decision. There were no allocations, no training, nothing for Palestinian schools. When we came into the picture and we said, okay, we develop the contents, we develop the trainings, and we will come and do all these trainings to teachers free of charge, the Ministry of Education said no, because the minute we said we are Palestinian queer women, they said, no, 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 you can't go into classrooms. You will teach them that they are Palestinians. They don't need to know that. And we were prevented. So basically what I'm trying to say is, also as a school teacher who worked within these institutions for many years, it's an agenda to constantly say Arabs, Palestinians, they don't talk about sexual and gender rights and freedoms. So this is not included in the agenda. And even though you come and you say, we are ready, the students are ready, the teachers are ready, we are still, so obviously this is a colonial tool to constantly keep us at a disadvantage, saying that we are not ready. It's the same excuse used every time, even when just to talk about sexuality, these are the same experiences of Sexuality Forum, which is one of the main organizations in Palestine that has revolutionized sexuality within Palestinian society, but they also had the same experiences. The Ministry of Education says you can't go to schools with these contents, and this is how they lock the doors of all of our schools to get better education and to be part of this awareness raising campaign that we conduct within our own Palestinian society.
Great. It's great tool. Censorship, it always works. And yeah, of course, you need it in order to continue telling, right, that no, Palestinians cannot talk about this, they are not ready. You have to make it impossible to continue using this. I think.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we don't live in normal conditions, we are fragmented. We are fragmented geographically. We don't have access to Gaza. We don't have access to many unrecognized villages within the state of Israel and also in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And we are fragmented geographically, we're fragmented socially, economically, politically, even with status. Some Palestinians, they have a green card, they have an Israeli passport. Some Palestinians, they don't have even any form of identification. So keeping this fragmentation and even deepening this fragmentation by continuing the policies of home demolition, displacement, besieging entire spaces like Gaza and so on and so forth, issuing permits for certain people and not issuing permits, controlling the freedom of movement, occupying every bit of space that Palestinians have. This makes obviously life harder, but it also makes it extremely necessary and even more necessary to interact with this intersectionality, because I heard what you said, Èlia, that it has been here in Palestine as well. The most important priority is the national struggle, then the women, if we have time, and then if we have any time and opportunities, then we will address LGBTQIA+ rights. So this will not work. One day we will be free of occupation. We will be free of settler colonialism. We will be free of apartheid. And we will be ready to live freely as a society. And therefore we need to address the rights of all minorities and all members of our society together.
Thank you. I have a question from the students. Question for Ghadir. To what extent do you think that the same strategies and ways of fighting for recognition can be shared between Europe and Palestine, and by extension, the Middle East? Coming out and identifying oneself as a person with a non-normative sexuality can be done in the same way in both contexts, or otherwise strategies need to be contextualized?
I think we talk a lot about the specificity of each context, and we talk a lot about the specificity of the context here in Palestine. And I think using the same strategy, I think we have to be sensitive. I think what in my opinion can be more effective and beneficial is to learn about each other context and to see what strategies can work within your context. How can you adapt it, and how can you change some of the tools that we use here in order to bring more visibility and understanding. I am a great believer in combining things together. And I think what is more important is to try and be effective. I mean, what theories are being effective, what theories are being practical, what strategies are being effective, and to try to learn from the experiences of one another. I think we have seen a lot of exchanges with certain parts of Europe that were very similar to some of the challenges. In times we were inspired by the way people were organizing, and I think very often also inspired movements and radical feminist movements within Europe that were not able to make visible this intersectionality within their own communities. And I think it was it's an ongoing learning process that whenever I attend any conference or any gathering, there's so much sharing of knowledge and strategies, and the most important thing is the act of solidarity, to care about each other's struggles, to be knowledgeable about each other's struggles, and whenever we can to do something. I believe that each and every person, there are so many horrible things going on in our world and sometimes in our region, and very often we feel helpless, that there's nothing we can do besides shedding a tear. But I think in the case of Palestine and in the case of Gaza, each and every one of us, from where you're sitting right now, you can make a change. Whether you're an activist, whether you are in the academia, whether you can bring more awareness to your groups, you can bring more awareness to your classes, to your colleges, to your universities, and be attentive to what's going on here in Palestine. And of course, always try to bring more visibility and bring Palestinian voices to share their experiences so we can work more effectively together. I think that for many years, the Zionist project has been invested in oppressing Palestinians, and it has been invasive to every place in our lives. And sometimes we feel overwhelmed by these struggles. But today, with an effective BDS, with a lot of active solidarity from colleges, from academics, from groups, institutions, movements, trade unions around the world, and nations, most importantly, nations, and hopefully to be followed by governments who are taking a stance against these oppressive policies and being in active solidarity with Palestinians. So whenever you are not sure about anything, you can contact us, you can contact PACB, the Palestinian academic boycott, you can contact BDS headquarters, or any of the activist and grassroots movements and organizations here in order to work collaboratively to benefit both of us.
Of course. And I think that's when you say about visibility, it's really important tool and necessary for all. And there's another question here. Could you please tell us more about the situation of the LGBTI community in Palestine? Can same-gender couples act freely in public spaces? What about trans people? Do they face rejection?
Okay, there are so many, the situation is different in many parts, but I can talk about our experiences with Aswat. When Aswat first started in Haifa, there were no gay-friendly spaces, obviously. It started within the feminist movement. We operated for many years under the umbrella of feminist organizations. And I think it's through our work and collaboration with other organizations, with KUS, the Queer Film Festival, we have collaborations with many spaces in Haifa theaters, clubs, sometimes, and youth movements, youth centers. So we try to screen the movies in different spaces in order to create more safe spaces for LGBT people. Now, when we say safe spaces, sometimes we hear also homophobes. They want to create safe spaces for their kids in order not to see queer people. So I think that, you know, the normal spaces and for people to feel normal in all spaces, you know, creating this safety is something that trans and queer people can walk freely in the street or go to a restaurant or go to a bar or go to a university and move freely around or use public transportation without being bullied, without being harassed, without suffering any form of violence. So it is something that we try to create through awareness raising campaigns. And I think within the last couple of years we have seen, we had the first march, you know, within the first queer march within Palestinian society in 2019. It was also organized following a stabbing of a Palestinian trans person in Tel Aviv. So it was also a big statement to say that Tel Aviv is not a gay haven if you're a Palestinian. Maybe if you are Israeli, maybe if you are European, but not for the Palestinians. So we've seen a Palestinian trans person being stabbed in Tel Aviv next to a trans shelter. So it was clear that Tel Aviv cannot be safe for Palestinians, but we do try to create safe spaces for also for women to interact here, but just to speak generally about the experience of being Palestinian, whether inside the state of Israel or within the occupied Palestinian territories. We are constantly viewed as a threat. We're constantly viewed as the enemy. I particularly remember returning from the airport after this aggression on Gazans in 2014. And I think just speaking Arabic on the train was threatening to one of the women. And she was about to call security. And I think if I wasn't close to home, maybe if she would ask anyone to shoot, then anyone would shoot. So the feeling of safety is not something that we are familiar with in the public sphere as Palestinians. It doesn't matter what you look like, what's your history, what's your identity, what's your religion. They just see you as the Palestinian and you automatically become the enemy. And so are all the millions who live in Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. They have to go through roadblocks every day just to go to school, to visit their friends, to go for a walk, to go to see a doctor. Everything that we take for granted, Palestinians have to ask for permission from the oppressive colonial Israeli. So it's a completely different and challenging situation. Nonetheless, we also try to create, to bring safety and to talk about violence against queers. We launch campaigns. Obviously, we have seen, like many places around the world, that violence is increasing during the pandemic, and being confined to your home, spending more time with your family and neighborhood. So I think we try to bring more visibility, to bring more understanding, but to be completely honest, I myself, I don't feel safe most of the time when I'm in the public sphere. So it's a constant struggle.
Yes, in fact, as just linking Palestinian and safety, it's kind of difficult. Whether you put more tags in this Palestinian, right? Mm-hmm. There's another comment here that was very touching, sorry. The family protection law draft in Palestine is frozen after several years of civil society engagement. Some argue that advocating for diversity with Palestinian authorities is becoming more and more challenging lately. How do you see it evolving?
Well, it's a big question to try and. There are huge gaps between what the PA is announcing on global platforms and signing all kinds of agreements, and with there are huge gaps with practicality. I'm not very familiar with all these procedures being based in Israel. And I think it would be best to try and find out through organizations or activists working directly with the PA. But I think that I can only say that people are not depending on the PA to bring justice to their lives. I think grassroots movements and organizations, I think the PA is occupied, just like Palestine. And I think through the diligent work of radical activists and organizations, we are seeing change within, voicing Palestinian women voices. But other than that, I have participated in many panels lately to try and discuss what is the situation of the Palestinian woman. Who is the Palestinian? She's not just, the mother of the martyr or the mother of the political prisoner. The Palestinian women's struggles led the first and second intifada. They still lead the Palestinian movement, and they lead the national struggle. But unfortunately, like women throughout the world, our voices are being marginalized. And I think it's very important for us to address that as well. Our voices are being marginalized by two societies who are completely different and in conflict. And I think this is one of the most particular specificities of our context. We work within Palestinian society, which is fragmented, some besieged, some under occupation, and some within an apartheid state. And we counter pinkwashing, which is the massive propaganda of Israel. So we also need to counter these policies. So it makes our work much more intense and intersectional all the time.
You have talked about the film festivals that Aswat organizes. Which is the commitment of artists active in other forms of art, music or literature, for example?
Sorry,
like,
what is
the commitment of artists active in other forms like music, literature, Aswat is involved, I think, in other forms, not only film festivals.
Yes, the film festival is part of the
organize.
So the film festival is part of one program that Aswat's been operating for 6 or 7 years, which is social change, art and culture within social change. And within this, we also organized exhibitions for trans and queer artists. We also we have a knowledge production program where we gather stories and narratives of LGBTQI women from Palestine and the region to tell their personal, social, and political challenges. So today we have more than 30 productions. One of them was translated into Spanish, not Catalan yet. So you are more than welcome to translate it. So we have Waqfat Banat. I should have it here in my library, but it will take me a couple of minutes to look for it. So we have Waqfat Banat, which is a collective of 23 personal narratives of queer women. It was issued, I think, in 2010. And so far it's been translated to 5 languages, Arabic, English, I think Spanish, Italian, and not French probably. So we try also we have an archive of also to try and historize the Palestinian queer movement and the productions within it. So I think, through knowledge production, through hosting exhibitions, addressing art, and also being active part of other film festivals around the world. I think it encourages also the commitment of artists, and we have seen it very, very clearly, through our campaigning globally.
Culture is always a needed tool, right, to work in every fight. Another question here says, Spain is working on a transgender law that would widen transgender people's rights. This debate seems to have split the feminist camp between those including transgender women within the feminist movement and those feminists that reject their integration in the movement? How do you stand regarding transgender women and their integration in feminist movements?
I think that as women, the feminist movement, by definition, should be inclusive of all women. And I think this exclusion of certain groups is, in my opinion, does not contribute to our movement. It doesn't contribute to our discourse, and it doesn't contribute to our belief system. I think that supporting not just trans women, you know, there's a lot of, yes, trans women. It's very important to give visibility, very important to raise awareness. But today it's trans women, tomorrow it can be anyone. We have to be very, very careful about these narratives that continue to divide us. I think it's important to give visibility, it's important to give a voice, but within this inclusion, and not to try and, because some you know, some feminists or some groups, they don't want to lose some of their wins within the larger society. So they don't want to jeopardize. These have been our experiences here, you know, with Aswat. It's not that we were welcomed by all the feminists and, you know, they were dying to have us in all their spaces. Obviously not. It was a very long, challenging process of, some of the feminists were very, very radical, and they're very welcoming, and they're very supportive, but many others weren't. And it was a challenge to still want to, you know, work within these circles that weren't sure. You're not sure whether they're accepting you or not. So I think that to learn from these experiences, I think I can't decide for any feminist movement. We can only sometimes learn from one another, maybe critically or less critically. But I think that the feminist movements and feminists should give all the support they have and they can provide to everyone, especially trans women. We've seen trans women being killed in New York. So it's not that trans women, you know, they have achieved their full visibility and rights. So it's very important to try and be in solidarity with, you know, within all groups, and not to fragment our movement with all these differences. I hope I understood the question correctly.
I think, yeah, in all the feminist scopes are the idea, this issue of the transgender people are kind of in the middle of the debate. I think not only in Spain, in different countries, but yeah, now the debate nowadays in Spain is a lot around this. So,
I think what I can share from our own experiences is that what used to happen maybe 20 years ago with the Israeli feminist movement, there were a lot of Palestinian women that were part of the feminist movement, the Israeli feminist movement. And I think, you know, after Oslo in 1995, a lot of these efforts started drifting because the Israelis, they wanted to give visibility to the feminist agenda of the Palestinians, but not the national, not the political. So it was very clear, you can't pick and choose. And we can see with the early 2000s, all the, you know, organizations who were part of Israeli Palestinian partnerships under coexistence, this infamous term, where they were all deported. And then we saw how the feminist organizations are being established, and then they hosted us. It wasn't, so I think that sometimes trying to pick and choose what is more suitable for our agenda and our popularity within our own society is exactly the opposite of feminist theory. It's exactly the opposite of queer theory and intentions. So I hope that we will try to be more committed to our values and not choose the easy way out.
Yeah, well, I think nowadays there are some branches of feminism that really don't challenge the state. So yeah, well, there are a lot of feminisms. And I wanted to ask you also if you have meet with European or American associations that LGBT that have approached you, but at the same time, when you proposed your intersectionality with the Palestinian cause, that you saw that they were okay, but not the political or not the national. That they kind of rejected this part, or like that. No, please don't mix with this, because it's Israel and Palestine is too complicated. So have you found or encountered these kind of answers from any association from America or Europe? Because sometimes from people that maybe are not very close to the cause, or they don't know about, it's kind of sometimes like, not because they don't want to put it on the focus, but because they are kind of scared, like, oof, Israel and Palestine, this is a difficult issue, please leave it behind.
Thank you very much. I think usually we call this white supremacy. The people who are, this is too complicated for me to deal with. So yes, of course, I think the vast majority of unfortunately, the world is still, on the side of white supremacy, at least the governments are. But I think I personally was inspired by, Black Lives Matter movement, by many, many movements that were from our experiences, whether in Europe or in the US. I think we have been inspired by groups who have addressed the multi-layer oppression of other women. And I think that people who want to equalize between the oppressed and the oppressor are being complicit with the oppressor. So I don't see, today I don't feel a need to explain, if you're keeping silent on this oppression, or you're saying, I don't want to be in the middle of this conflict, it's not my business, and then you keep a blind eye and a deaf ear, then this is your choice. You're being on the wrong side of history. But I think today, my own vision is to see more people standing in solidarity with the struggle of one another, and not say it's not my business, because it is our business to see justice and freedom happen to everyone, just as we see it happening to ourselves. And I think one of the greatest things I learned from my few travels to the Spanish state is that some of the activists and organizations there will not rest. They will not rest until we are all free. And I'm always, 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 always inspired by these efforts. And I really thank each and every one of you for your efforts that you're doing in order to get more justice and freedom for all Palestinians. We are learning so much from you.
Well, the world from Palestine, I think. And another question, does cooperation work with other associations like Aswat in other countries of the region? Have you managed to build networks within the region?
Yes, that's another challenge, of course, because up until recently, most of the countries in the region are Australia as enemy state, so we can't really. I think when I first joined Aswat, there was a lot of interactions with the queers in Lebanon and queers in Jordan and queers in Egypt, and we have seen queers leading the. You mentioned the Arab Spring, and the latest demonstrations also in Beirut were led by queer feminist women. There were some underground efforts where queers from Middle East and North Africa could meet, and a lot of regional organizations continued this effort, and I think it was really overwhelming to see for myself for the first time also queers from the region, young activists who some of them were clueless about Palestine, but some of them were educated from age 0 about Palestine. So it was really, really intense, and I think that with everything that is happening in the region, I think queer resistance and queer solidarity is most needed. And yes, we have been, obviously, for many years Also, through our productions, through COUS, giving this platform that cannot only serve the local community, but also the regional community and the global community as well. And I think because of that, we have some of the productions, all of the productions are in Arabic, but some of them are being translated to other languages as well. So yes, we have a lot of interactions. It's not the most normal ones, but it's not very direct most of the time, but there are collaborations.
Great. And there's another question here. How do you evaluate the announcement of Marwan Barghouti's independent list in the next Palestinian legislative elections?
It's just, I think that this is a very serious question to ask a queer activist, but I think we have to try alternative creative ways. We don't live in a normal state. We live under occupation, under siege, under settler colonialism, within an apartheid state. He's a political prisoner. And I think that having a democratic election within Palestine is not just necessary, it's needed.
Good. And also, if there were more women in all the politics and all the elections, that would be great. But this is still a utopia and everywhere, even here.
Yes.
Lack of, well, we're still waiting for a Catalan president or a Spanish president. So sometimes we try to teach others, but we still.
I think women, yes, but not,
waiting.
Absolutely. And I would also add, not just women, we want feminist women, because we've seen Hillary Clinton. She was a war criminal. We've seen the Israeli Tzipi Livni, another war criminal. What we want to see is principled women, hardcore feminist women who believe in justice, who believe in freedom for all. I think this is the kind of women that we want to see in the public sphere and involved in politics and decision making.
Mm-hmm. This also will take more time, because as you just recall, Margaret Thatcher, for example, women we have seen in power are like men with other bodies, but we still, it seems like if you want to be a woman and reach high level of politics, you can have to resemble a man or have politics like men, or like if you have a feminist agenda, you will be put apart earlier in your political career, right? So still everywhere we need these changes. Well, I don't know if there are more questions. Sorry, my audio. I think there are no more questions. It's been very interesting and very illustrative. So yeah, I hope we can kind of follow this film festivals, especially these COUS. It will be very, for me, I didn't know it, so for me it will be very interesting to follow. And yeah, Lourdes is saying, thank you for the inspiring talk. Thank you very much. I think it has put a lot of light in what even we, a lot of people here are familiar to the Palestine cause. But as I said, I am upset because some kind of this pinkwashing is kind of working, or has worked for a long time. So yeah, even if you are if you feel solidarity for the Palestinian cause, even if you demonstrate, right, still the queer element to put in the middle and the feminist, it's like, wow, we needed to put some light and some order in these ideas and in this reality. Yeah, great talk. Thanks everyone involved. Shukran, Ghadir. Thank you very much. It's been really interesting. I will say to the students here that we will have the article, and all the people that gives the talk also sends the article, so we will send you the article from Ghadir. I guess you will be very interested. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and it's been an honor. We hope, I'm sure we will see you here again. I hope when this pandemic situation is over, we could bring you to Barcelona and see you in person and talk about the evolution and all these movements. And I hope maybe, inshallah, everything will be a bit better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you for all the participants. Wonderful talk. Thank you. I think everybody is in love with the talk. Thank you again. And see you soon. Thank you very much, Ghadir.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye, everyone. Bye.